I just realised I can mute myself. Sorry. There's no box that comes up that says mute, and I thought that meant you'd muted me. I was going to say that's really rude.
No, you can mute yourself.
Oh, how exciting! So, Luke, how are you?
Oh, okay. I've had a haircut finally. Fresh trim.
It's looking swish. It's looking very swish.
I hate when it gets long and yeah. I barely earn into it.
It's pretty impressive. She's good.
Yeah, she's quite good. Yeah, it saves me money, so
yeah,
that's what we like.
Really good. I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed with her. And both of us have trained today, which is exciting.
Yes,
we've both been a little bit hit and miss. So the fact that we've just seen each other in the gym, not for the first time this week, I feel like we need to give ourselves a high five.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Everybody may be wondering, what is the topic of today's podcast?
What is the topic?
So, you want to build muscle. I just FYI for people that like Luke obviously edits our podcast because I'm technologically inept, and you'll notice he does like a nice title, a nice intro, sends out a nice email. I basically bowled up to him in the gym and said, I've got today's podcast and I want you to call it this, and I want him to call it so ... you want to build muscle. So if this podcast absolutely sucks, we can blame me.
We can just blame Harriet. Yeah. Oh, you can edit this one too.
No, because you're the one that likes doing stuff properly. I would literally stick it up raw and go, there you go, you got the goods.
I mean, to be honest, I don't do a lot of editing on it. I just try and cut out any like little bits of if like the internet cracks up and there's like a big pause or bits like that, right, kind of pull.
I called one of my clients by the wrong name in their check-in the other day. And said, whilst it was still running, when I should really pause this and edit it, and I didn't. Luckily, it was relevant to the name I called her, but yeah, it's okay. She's still a client. It's fine. Okay, so let's do this in. We're going to keep this relatively science-free where we can, and relatively short because we're both aware that we like to talk when we get going.
Yeah, so the idea is kind of give some nice practical information surrounding sort of building muscle and stuff that you can actually kind of take and put into action almost straight away and understand the reasoning why you're doing this kind of stuff. So I thought a kind of a good place to start would be if, Harriet, you wanted to explain why we want to build muscle.
I mean, my number one reason, and I think the number one reason a lot of people actually work out as to why they want to build muscle, is because it's sexy as hell. Yeah. And the reason I'm saying this, and I'm saying it quite bluntly, is because for years we used to talk about toning. We used to talk about, oh yeah, I want to lose some body fat and then I want to tone up. And very sadly, I have to report that toning is not really a thing. The process to which you're referring, I think that would be to which. God, it's a grammatical.
It's no use asking me.
I know, it's not. It's really not. I could say whatever I want. You were like, yeah, sure, it makes sense. Yeah. The process to which you're referring is building muscle. That is what gives your body that quote unquote toned appearance and gives you a shape. So when you look at guys and girls in the gym and you might think, oh wow, I love that physique, I love that look, the shape he or she is built, like, oh my god, the shoulders are popping, the ass is popping. I don't know why my accent just oh god, I've been watching too many American TV programs. That is muscle.
Yeah,
sometimes it's great genetics, but a lot of the time they've worked for it.
But even great genetics, like, it's still going to be that muscle tissue there for the majority of what we're looking at. But a lot of people are going to have like this aesthetic goal of they want to improve their appearance and the way they look. There's going to be some situations, performance-based, that you might want to build muscle to get stronger in certain areas, but then it's going to be sort of transitioning between strength-based programming and more sort of hypertrophy muscle building. But for the large part, most people want that body recomposition effect of looking better, building muscle and losing body fat.
Yep.
So how do we go about it?
Oh, wow. Right. One of the things, and I want to start with this one, which probably a lot of people wouldn't necessarily say is one of the first things to entice you into wanting to go on a quest to build muscle. But I think we're very realistic in our coaching kind of life and in real life. And one of the first things you need is time. None of this is going to come quickly. You might be able to drop body fat in 8, 12, 16 weeks. But unless you're totally new to the game, you are not going to be building muscle at a rate that you are dropping body fat. So let's just kind of kick you while you're down first and say one of the first things you are going to need is time. And this is why even competitive athletes, bodybuilders, etc., they will often have periods of time where they're not kind of at their physical peak, because their efforts are spent in growing more muscle tissue. Obviously bodybuilding kind of athletes that do competitions and stuff, you'll have heard them say, you know, I'm having an off season, or they might take a year out, and they'll explain their reasons why. But quite often the reason for that is because they need to spend some significant time on muscle, and it doesn't happen overnight, sadly.
Yeah, and this is one of the issues where some competitors trying to compete year on year, and they're falling into this trap of, okay, let's take some blanket numbers. Okay, like they're going to spend 12 weeks, let's say, dieting into a show. Yeah. Then they've got their show period and time. They might do a couple of shows over 4 weeks or so. Then transition out of that. They are saying they've got this off season, but if you look at, off the top of my head, is one particular study I always reference back to. I can't remember who it's by, but it's on a natural bodybuilder, and it takes his sort of hormone profiles through his competition prep and after to see how long it takes basically his baseline testosterone to reach back to normal, like normal pre-competition prep levels, and it took 6 months.
Whoa.
So that is a long time to be able to get systems back to a position where you can potentially look to actually build some good quality muscle tissue. Yeah. And when you're restricting this time frame so much to then go try and compete year on year, you're not going to make developments to your physique that are going to significantly improve you. You're just going to almost enter this cycle of diet back to maintenance, diet back to maintenance, and not spend time in a surplus pushing your body to actually grow tissue, which is really what we're trying to do at the end of the day. Like I say, fat loss can be a lot more aggressive and in a lot shorter time frame than building muscle. It takes years and years to build muscle. Obviously, if you're a newbie, there's going to be some good newbie gains and building some tissue quite quickly. But as soon as you've had a good 2 years or so.
When we talk about editing and Luke's going, now I've got to get rid of the phone.
Yeah.
This is real life.
Yeah, so obviously I've like a good few years, like actually that sort of newbie phase. It's going to take a long time to build and add significant amounts of tissue to your frame. So that's one thing that you really need to understand at the beginning. It's just going to be a long-term thing. And once you actually accept that, you relieve some of that kind of pressure on you of like, oh, why don't I look like these transformation pictures that look as though they've grown a lot in a very short amount of time, which typically is the fact they've lost body fat in that time. So they just look bigger. They're actually going to be smaller, but Or on the other hand, you look at people that have jumped on gear and just blown up, and you're like, well, I can do that. No.
Okay, so if factor number one is time, what would you say is factor number two?
I would say focusing on your training.
Okay.
So there's quite a few aspects of training we can actually cover. So let's do training and then sort of transition into like nutrition as well, because I feel like nutrition is a little bit simpler. Whereas training, there's I feel a lot more important with actually like trying to build muscle tissue. So there's a lot of different aspects of training that you could look at to try and quote unquote optimize your training towards building muscle tissue. But really what we're trying to do is provide a stimulus to the muscle to then almost, it's like that trigger to cause it to grow. And what happens around that with our nutrition, our rest recovery, is allowing it to then repair and grow. So training is just the short-term stimulus. And there's a couple of different mechanisms in training that cause that. But to keep it simple, what we're really trying to do is take the muscle under tension within our training. So we want to choose exercises that are keeping that tension through the muscle. So we're not going to be looking at things like snatches, clean and jerks, or like explosive box jumps and things like that. We're going to look at more typically bodybuilding style exercises because they've picked those exercises for that specific reason, because they work. It takes the muscle under load, under tension, and works through a full range of motion. And that's what we're trying to accomplish from the training. So that would be kind of my first tip, is like picking the right exercises in the right sort of training format to be able to allow yourself to actually build and grow muscle. Next tip, Harriet, go.
Next tip. Okay, so once you've picked your exercises, you will then need to be working within a given rep range, which we've spoken about a lot in previous podcasts. But as much as there will be people telling you that X rep range is best or Y rep range is best, ultimately anywhere from about 5 to 30 repetitions is stimulative for muscle growth. So it's a very, very, very broad range within which you can work. But as I think we've said before, if you take exercises like hip thrusts, deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, pull-ups, do you really want to be doing 30 of those? Probably not. What's going to happen if you try and do 30 of those? You're going to have to lift at a lot lighter weight, and probably things like your grip, your cardiovascular capabilities, they're going to be the limiting factor, not physically what those muscles can do. So it's all well and good doing anywhere between 5 and 30 reps, but certain exercises are going to fare better within those rep ranges. Kind of as a blanket somewhere, not too far to be. I think the 10 to 20 is a kind of a sweet spot, isn't it? A lot of, not necessarily you'd want all of your exercises within that 10 to 20 rep range, but I think in terms of like 5 to 30, that's quite a nice area for a large chunk of your training to sit, because not only then can you probably recover a little bit better than if everything's within like a 5 to 10, but also there is a chance that it is going to actually be the muscle that you're training that's going to fail somewhere between those.
What you might find is that certain muscle groups respond better to certain rep ranges than others, or some muscle groups you just hate training like in that kind of higher rep hold or a lower one.
Made me think. Arms and shoulders, I like somewhere around 15 to 20. Any more than that and I want to cry and be sick. Just,
but also in the same
one thing that comes into your head and you're like, no.
in the same extent, sometimes like small muscle groups like that can be, if you're trying to drop towards like 6 or 8 on like bicep curls,
Oh, could you imagine?
but that's the thing, you're more likely to compromise the effectiveness of the exercise than the stimulus you're getting from it. And you're probably going to get that kind of stimulus at that lower rep range to some degree from your auxiliary, like your compound movements, for example, with like your bench press working through like heavy stuff on your triceps. Like you can do heavier stuff, but you're probably going to get a better stimulus working some of those lighter rep ranges as well. But with the rep ranges you're training as well, this is going to link into your program design, because you're not going to always want to do the same rep ranges for the same exercises or same portions of your workout, and your training program might transition into then more of a block periodized design, where you've got phases of higher volume training and other phases of lower volume, higher weight, higher intensity kind of style training. So you're almost allowing differences within the training to get the stimulus from both elements, which is something I quite like to program. Or even going back a couple of years, there was more sort of popularized formats of training like DUP, like daily undulating periodization, where you're training some heavier stuff on some days and then lighter stuff on other days. So you have that fluctuation within the week opposed to blocks. But then all these periodization models can lead into each other. You can have like a linear progressive daily undulating periodization in a block style. So you could have like multiple different formats just all meshed into one. But the idea of that is that there is progression within your training, which I guess is kind of our next tip, which would be to have that progression. Because if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, yes, you're going to still have potentially some muscle gain effects just from like actually stimulating the muscle, but unless that is almost constantly at the top end of sort of intensity, fairly close to failure, you're not going to really see that benefit. So you're going to want to, again, kind of structure your programming and your periodization so you have almost fluctuations within that. For example, deloads, letting yourself recover and grow, but also then on the other side of that, certain weeks where you are pushing closer to failure, if not at failure, that you're having this strategic progression within your training to do more and, in a sense, kind of overload the muscle, make it do work that is going to cause that stimulus and need to grow.
Make it work.
Make it work.
And I guess that leads us very nicely onto a word that you did just mention, which is intensity.
Yes.
Intensity. Oh, we love a bit of intensity. Essentially, when we talk about intensity, we're not saying you need to be working at 10 out of 10 capacity all the time, because the fatigue is going to be very, very high with that. However, if you're constantly hitting somewhere and I don't know, say you're doing pull-ups and you're like, oh, that was an easy set of 10. The intensity is probably not there. It's not particularly challenging. Now, while we don't subscribe to the no pain, no gain methodology, I guess that would be a methodology, wouldn't it? You do need to have within your progressive overload also some increase in intensity as you go through your training program. Because if it always feels easy, chances are you're leaving a lot of potential on the lifting table, as it were. But then likewise, if it's always super, super insanely tough, if you've got an 8-week training block, by week 3, you're probably going to be on the floor and needing to take an early deload because you've gone in too hard, too fast. I think you all have probably also looked into this. Obviously, we quite often with our clients use the reps in reserve system, don't we, for kind of gauging intensity. So essentially anywhere from around 5 reps and under to total muscular failure is kind of the most stimulative for growth, is it not? Have I worded that the right way around?
Yeah.
But
To
within
max
that,
like to get like the most out of sort of muscle growth, you want to be sort of working 4 or 5 reps from failure to failure.
yes. But within that, I'm sure I read in one of their lectures that for as much as you can obviously periodize, so say week 1, you could be working 5 reps from failure, week 2, 3 to 4, and so on and so forth. I am sure that there was some data, and again, don't ask me studies because I never remember them, where around 2 to 3 was like the sweetest spot. So even though we might work within like a 1 to 2 and 0 to 1, say in the last kind of phase of a training cycle, even if you just stay around 2 to 3, that can still be quite a sweet spot for muscle growth. And I'm hoping it was 2 to 3.
I think that would be logical. Around that area would be fairly like predominantly stimulative. Like for the most of my kind of lifting career, it's only been really like the last 4 years or so that I've kind of learned more about sort of intensely and like proximity to failure.
The old days, you just used to go.
The old days
I didn't even think about
train, and it was just like, okay, I just need to do. I knew about sort of periodization and progression, but it was always the case of, okay, like these were the numbers I'd done last week, I've got to do more than that. And that's how I progressed. And I was always working probably 1 to 2 reps from failure for the majority of the time. Every now and again I would just like fuck something up and just couldn't complete it, but like that was training. And it kind of depends how pedantic you want to be with your training. Do you want to be very specific, or do you want to be a bit more loose and enjoy it, have some sort of variances with it? And that's going to depend on like the degree of results you want and how happy you are currently, and you as a person in a sense as well. Like some people like to just make sure that everything is ticked off, everything is bang, nail on the head, that's what I'm doing. And others want a bit more flexibility and in a sense like integrating it into a lifestyle that they can train with friends and like maybe do some different exercises or push themselves a little bit harder than they might some weeks. And that depends. But I think you're right with it roughly being sort of the 2 to 3 reps in reserve would be the best kind of frame for proximity to failure.
Well, because there's a point in time at which you can push so hard that your need for recovery then is so much greater. And that can lose you decent training time, can't it? If you go in and kind of go absolutely balls to the wall every session, every day, and don't prioritize recovery, you're going to get to a point where your body turns around and goes, no, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And like you were saying earlier, you could have a program that lasts for 8 weeks or so of good strategic progressive overload, being able to push and again providing that stimulus, or week 3 you push so hard that you're absolutely broken, need to deload, and in that deload we're not going to be progressing and we're not going to be training to enough to stimulate to grow. We're going to be like in essence dropping our training volume down to a maintenance to allow that recovery, because we have to super compensate for how much we pushed in the past, which is okay and we will need, and we can do that, but the time frames that we are going to have to be able to do that are going to be shorter. Like you can't work to failure just week after week after week, because you're not going to be able to recover, like saying not going to be able to push and keep that going. It's just, you're going to break.
And we both know a little bit about breaking, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered exercise selection, progressive overload, intensity. Where to next on training?
We've done rep ranges as well.
Oh,
And the next one I'm going to cover is frequency of training.
Yes.
Now, you got frequency of training and frequency of training muscle groups, because frequency of training, like, this is going to be sort of fairly obvious, but if you're only training once a week, then you know, you're not going to be making much progress. But it kind of does link in with frequency of the muscle groups you're training, because we're going to want to typically train a muscle group 2 to 3 times per week. So to, in essence, like maximally stimulate like muscle protein synthesis within the muscles, which allows that kind of growth, because we need that stimulus and recovery each time. And if we're only training each muscle group once per week, that's very short frame stimulus. You're going to be, say, for example, we train like the old bros bit of chest on Mondays. You're going to train chest on Mondays and then hammer that, get a load of sets out on that, but half of them are going to be dog crap anyway and just not really worth it. Then Tuesday, you can be recovering. Wednesday, Thursday, we could potentially give that another bout of stimulus to then potentially cause more growth. But if you're not training it again until the following Monday, we're, for a better use of words, like leaving gains on the table. Like, we could have more growth there by providing more stimulus. And this is where we want to spread out our volume over the week. So you, for example, if you would typically be doing, like, let's say 20 sets on chest on that Monday, again, half of them are going to be just useless and worthless, because you'd be like this crumpled ball that just, you can't feel anything. But if we split that and, for example, said do like 10 sets on Monday, 8 to 10 sets on Thursday, then those sets that we perform, especially that second group, are going to be much better quality stimulus to the muscle, much better performance. And again, we're providing that second dose of stimulus to the muscle to be able to grow. So that frequency is going to be better going forwards. I think that there's going to be some degree of too much frequency, in essence of, for example, you could say, okay, I'm just going to do full body every day and train everything. But the issue with that is, one is going to be time restraints, because it's going to take you ages to train that full body, in terms of getting enough sets to be able to provide a good stimulus per session. And I really need to learn to like make notes of like the studies that I'm trying to reference and know what these ones are, because I think it's from James Krieger's meta-analysis. I can't quote me on that, because I'm like 70% sure it was his.
Okay, 70s.
But his kind of conclusion was roughly, you're looking for an effective kind of stimulus to that muscle. You want to be doing about 8 sets within a session for that to be enough stimulus for that kind of muscle group. Obviously, for some muscles, we're going to get some stimulus as like a byproduct of other exercises. For example, if we're doing a bench press, it's all going to have stimulus for the chest, but also there's going to be stimulus in the triceps. So that's going to provide some degree of that total amount of sets. So if you're doing like larger muscle groups, probably going to want to aim towards that upper end, like 6 to 8 sets. Smaller muscle groups, you could probably do like 4 or so, having that additional stimulus from the main compound movement. But so if we're doing, for example, a full body routine every day of the week, our sets would be so low that we're doing like 2 sets on each body part to be able to fit it into the time frame that is probably then not going to be effective. And this is where you can then start to go like, okay, 2 a day training that your volume is split all over the place. But again, most people do not have the time for that. So for most people, this is where upper lower body splits work, or push pull legs, variations of that depending on how many times in a week you can train. And for the most part, I would say 3, 4, 5 days is kind of the sweet spot. If you're dedicated and have a lot of time to be able to put to going to the gym. So that really, if you don't have a life, you could do 6 days a week. I'm only saying I can say that because I used to train 6 days a week. So
did I once upon a time. It was great. But yeah, I literally did nothing else. There was one point, there were a couple of weeks where I did 7, and I was like, I need to find some people to hang out with.
I've done 2 a day sessions before.
Ooh, I've done like 2 as in, strength at one point, cardio at another, but I've never done 2 strength training sessions. Thankfully, I've always had some semblance of a life.
But the sessions are much smaller when you're doing sort of 2 a day, because you're doing like 3 or 4 main exercises and per sort of like muscle group, and you might be splitting some of like the heavier work to the morning and lighter volume based stuff in the evening, which there's no doubt it does work because you are able to provide more stimulus and more sort of growth potential for that. But you need to match that with your recovery. And it's only really going to work for more advanced people anyway. So for the majority of people, training sort of 3, 4, 5 days a week is plenty. And that's where sort of upper lower body, full body, variations on push pull legs, those things are going to work very well for people. So yeah, that was my little ramble on frequency.
I really enjoyed it. Would it be fair to say then the next component part of training would be rest?
Yeah, I think I never really know where kind of rest and recovery fits in, because it's not really with training, it's not really with nutrition, it's kind of on its own.
Kind of everywhere, isn't it? But I think post-training is probably a good time to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because in part, you've just said you feel like the sweet spot is 3, 4, 5 days a week, which I would agree with wholeheartedly, which then leaves you for 3 or 2 days a week with the potential of some rest within that. But I think for some, especially if they're coming off the back of like a quest for fat loss, they really struggle with what rest actually means. Because it's very easy to go, oh, well, I'll just go to the gym and do some cardio, or I'll just go on a 30k bike ride and then, go for a walk with a friend this afternoon.
Yeah.
Whilst nobody's going to say, no, you can't go out for a walk, or no, you can't go and get your steps in, or no, if you want to go and do a spin class, you can't do that. However, rest, ladies and gentlemen,
I'll tell you not to do a spin class.
If your quest is really truly to grow muscle, rest needs to mean rest. A gentle walk is fine.
Yeah, you can look at active rest, because it's going to increase circulation and provide muscle nutrients and oxygen to blood nutrition. Blood, nutrients and oxygen to those muscles that are going to need that to recover.
Yeah.
So active rest can be good, but the issue is then going to fall into if that activity that you're partaking in is going to be more detrimental than it is beneficial. And that's going to come down to the intensity, duration, and I guess energy requirements of that exercise. So light stuff, whether it's like say a walk around, or a casual bike ride that's only a small duration, a little bit of light sort of cardio, but not getting like doing metabolic conditioning sessions, like dragging
Yeah.
a sled round, like those kind of things, they're just going to be eating into your recovery capacity further.
Yeah. There is also some sense in having recovery in your like post training window as well, isn't there? Which I think sometimes, as especially like personal trainers, we can be really guilty of, is finishing your training session, shoving some food in your face, and then literally heading straight back
Yeah.
out to deal with another client. But actually, again, this God, we're doing so well with these studies. I like to go, do you know what, this is real life and people don't need all the science. There is some evidence to suggest that like kind of sitting and chilling for a bit in your post-training time is actually beneficial, is there not? And
Yeah.
rather than flying from A to B, albeit we do understand that not everybody has the time to get in from the gym and sit and chill and kind of, you know, watch something mindless on TV for a bit, especially if you're training, you know, on your lunch break or in the middle of the day. But if you can, having some quiet time post gym is again going to do you a favor.
And that's that parasympathetic nervous system stimulation of like actually resting, digesting, and recovering, which kind of leads us into like the nutrition stuff, because if
What a beautiful segue that
I know
was. That was so good. Anyone would think we planned this. We could actually get away with telling them that we planned it like this.
Yeah, I mean, we could even plan it and just actually make it good, but we thought we'd just, you know, wing it and see what happens.
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously nutrition is going to play a big part in muscle growth, in essence, to actually recover. Well, in recovery, but also then in performance, because if you're lacking energy and your nutrition is poor, you're not going to be able to perform in the gym to actually be able to put the required intensity and effort into your training that is going to allow you to grow. So there's the nutrition side from the performance element of pushing yourself in training, but also then recovering. And with nutrition, like we say, generally it's fairly simple. Like you can go down rabbit holes with muscle building and nutrition, but for the majority of people, you need to get the big rocks, the fundamentals in place first. So that's going to be making sure that you've got enough calories, because we need those calories to grow. So you need to be in a surplus. It doesn't have to be a big surplus, but there's going to need to be a surplus, and that will probably adapt and change over time. So it's likely going to be that it will creep up and you'll have to increase your calories slowly. And the other main contributor is making sure you've got a high protein intake, which is going to provide these substances and building blocks for muscle to grow. You can tell, like, I'm dyslexic when I speak, let alone read.
Sorry, I really enjoyed your substances. Oh dear, yes. The age-old calories is one that can upset people, isn't it? It's because, especially if you spent so long wanting to get smaller, wanting to get leaner, and then to be told, well, actually, to improve your physique, you now need to put on some weight. It can be a hard pill to swallow, but it's worthwhile. And if you genuinely can sit there and go, I value adding more muscle to my physique, then you are genuinely going to have to suck up the weight gain, get used to wearing some stretchier trousers, get used to not buying clothes in your post dieting size, and go, right, well, this is only going to improve my physique. And that's not saying that you'll stay at that heavier weight forever, but if you want to put on some decent tissue, within that you are going to also be putting on some body fat. It's not possible to isolate and just put on pure muscle. It's, you know, yes, some people manage it incredibly well without packing on fat, and this is why the age-old dirty bulk is not particularly beneficial. You know, you can't just ramp your calories up to 5,000 and start eating McDonald's and sitting on the sofa all day in the name of #I'm bulking.
Yeah.
Because you will end up putting on a lot of unwanted body fat. But being in an energy surplus, which is what you will need to be in, that is going to lead to some storage of energy, otherwise known as body fat. But it's okay, because eventually you'll probably get to a point where you go, right, okay, I've done enough growing now. You'll hang fire at maintenance for a bit, let everything settle, and then you might go, okay, I'm going to do another cut. You're going to diet, but you're going to look so much better because you'll have a lot more muscle than you did before.
Yeah.
So it's worth
And this
it.
is that kind of phasic training of going through these distinct phases of, okay, I'm going to apply attention and apply myself to this specific phase of building muscle tissue, and now like understand like a maintenance phase of why we're sort of sitting here, let's say letting everything reset, going into a diet phase. It might be a short diet phase, it might be an extended diet phase, but each distinct phase has its benefits, and making sure that you're sort of going through these to a extent of getting closer to that end result that you want is going to be beneficial.
Yeah.
Going on from that with nutrition, there's a couple of other areas that I can think of that provide value. One would be meal frequency. So before, obviously the underlying is calories and protein content, but if you want to then take it to that next level, having frequent feedings of protein is going to again stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which is almost that kind of switch that allows us to build that muscle. So we want that spaced frequently throughout the day. So if you're getting 4 feedings of protein of good quality source through the day, then that's going to be a good ballpark. You could potentially do 5 or 6, but beyond 6 it almost becomes redundant. Like the time between meals isn't going to be long enough, and the protein content of those is going to start to decline. So you're not really going to see any benefit. So again, most people 4 or 5 is a good ballpark kind of figure. 3 at a minimum if you're stuck on that breakfast, lunch, dinner vibe, you know.
I love it. You're stuck on that if you really can't. Yeah. I like 4 feedings a day, especially when I'm dieting. I'm a little bit lazy at the moment. It is mostly 3. But I think
an easy fourth is just a protein shake. Like have your 3 main meals and then just neck a protein shake.
No, and then I forget.
Yeah.
Awful. That's an awful excuse for a coach. It really, really is. So let's talk on protein actually. So
yes.
Once upon a time, there was the old, you needed to eat within 20 minutes of training, and that meal needs to be super high in protein. However, that's now been proven to be relatively untrue, isn't it? I think as long as you eat within kind of 2 hours of training, you're going to get the benefits. But also the amounts of protein, I think we now know that you can get a really good amount of muscle protein synthesis from a lot less protein than we used to be led to believe.
Yeah.
And is it muscle protein synthesis is saturated at about 40 grams?
I think
grams is kind of like a ballpark.
That's a good ballpark, which will maximally stimulate it, because really, like, it's not a case of, okay, you can just like crank it up and stimulate it as much as you need. It's a case of, okay, we need almost enough to flick that switch, although it's kind of a dial, but we can only turn that up to the max. Once you hit that max, there's no more than that. So that's really going to be probably around that kind of 40 grams. But this then depends on the source of protein and quality, because the leucine content of the protein is the primary driver to muscle protein synthesis. And most kind of complete protein sources are going to have leucine levels. I think it's around like 3 grams or something that stimulates that maximally anyway.
Yeah.
So most complete protein sources are going to have that within like 30 to 40 grams. If you're looking at very high quality stuff like whey, then
Where
whey, then like 20 to 30 is still going to be enough, because this does link in with frequency of feeding as well, because as I was saying, it's a dial opposed to a switch. It's not like it's on or off. We are going to have the amino acid levels in our blood still, so we may turn that dial up so it hits the max, but it's going to take time to simmer down and fluctuate down. So when that next feeding comes in, it's probably not going to be at the baseline 0 level that it might be, for example, overnight, because we have a long period of fasting. So that first protein hit you want in the morning, we want it to be a good source. So we get that sort of maximal stimulation up, and it starts off that curve of that wave, like you're saying, go through the day. So that's where we can probably definitely get away with some intakes being like 20 grams or so, because if you've had a feeding within a couple of hours still, your amino acid levels in the blood aren't going to be to that bottom end base, so we're going to be able to easily hit that max again. And the frequency of feeding, I'm pretty sure it's about 3 to 4 hours is how often we can kind of maximally stimulate it, to again get that full fluctuation. So that's where the recommendation of like four feedings a day kind of comes from, is sort of spacing those out to maximally stimulate. I think that's. Was there anything else to that I kind of missed out?
No, I don't think so. I think that was pretty damn solid. I guess the only other one thing I'd potentially mention is, depending on kind of your starting point, depending on how high you need to push your calories in order to get your surplus, you may then find that, as is natural, you are not as hungry as you may have been before. So kind of with regards to protein, I mean, I program anywhere from 1.2 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. But again, depending on how heavy you are, and if you're particularly somebody who is very well advanced anyway, you're still going to be on quite a lot of protein. Now, we know that protein is the most satiating macronutrient. That's why we bang on about it so much in regards to fat loss, is because it keeps you fuller for longer. That then can also have a semi-negative effect, because if you're trying to put on a lot of, eat a lot of calories, you may then find that your appetite gets in the way, or rather your lack of. And there is nothing worse than trying to force feed yourself for the gains when you're actually sick of food. Yeah. So this is where, in some instances, bringing down your protein amount slightly can help. But then also with regards to the foods that you're choosing slightly more highly palatable foods, slightly more calorie dense foods, basically in some respects doing the entire opposite of what we talk about when we talk about fat loss. So you want less volume. You probably don't want 10 portions of veggies a day. You probably just want to hit your 5. You might pick white pasta or white rice over brown to reduce, some fiber, which can also help keep you fuller. And you might want to do things like include a donut every single day.
Oh, yes.
As long as like the bulk of your calories don't come from highly processed foods, there's nothing wrong, especially when the quest is to gain some muscle. You've got more calories to play with, so you may as well use them, and you may as well get a little bit more enjoyment out of it, because it's a lot easier to eat a 400 calorie donut than it is a 400 calorie box of chicken and veg. So sounds. Basically, we're going to get a load of people being like, right, all our clients are going to turn around next week and be like, right,
I want to build muscle. I want those donuts.
Yeah, size up in those Gymshark leggings, girls, because we are packing some muscle.
Yeah.
I feel pretty content that we've covered a lot there.
Yeah. I mean, the only other kind of things I can think of will be like looking at sleep, and some kind of
area. There you go.
Yeah, sleep, recover. That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that was sort of fairly comprehensive enough
I do. We
with
can, I
training
guess,
and nutrition.
yeah, if anyone wants more on this, then
Yeah,
maybe we'll have to actually get between us some idea of the studies that we're actually referencing and maybe do So You Want to Grow Muscle Part 2. But I
yeah,
feel like for the majority of the people that we know that listen, this should cover a little realistic what to expect if you turn around to us and go, right, okay, I want to gain some muscle. What do I do?
yeah. Because like I said, like, there is rabbit holes you can go down in terms of like training and nutrition for building muscle tissue. But if you haven't got these things in place that we mentioned, like there's no point looking into intricacies of them,
No.
because like these are the things that are going to have the biggest effect. These are 90% of your results. The other stuff is just the sprinkles on the cake. Like they might be fun and they might taste nice, but
They don't
not
add
the
a lot.
substance.
No, I like that. And let's leave them with cake. That was
Yeah,
fun.
cool.
Okay, cool. Happy building muscle, people.
Yep, enjoy, and we'll catch you next time.
Next time. Bye.